So hi everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to Magnify Your Impact, and I'm super looking forward to this interview for two major reasons. One is that this is with a gentleman that shares the passion for South Africa as I do, and also has a real passion for the ocean, which you're going to find out, and has taken an amazing passion of his in his whole life, and which many of us dream about, is not just taking a passion and turning it into a vocation, but taking it a step further than that, and taking his passion, turning it into a vocation, but also inspiring a huge amount of youngsters to utilize his passion of surfing to be able to give them a platform for change in their own lives and to support the community around them. So this is going to be really inspirational for me and for all of us listening to Tom as he speaks to us today. So let me start this process by introducing Tom to you guys, and to say that this is Tom Hewitt MBE, and he's clearly done some amazing stuff in his life. So welcome, Tom. Thank you very much for being here today, first of all.
Thank you.
I just wanted to give you a brief introduction because obviously, as I said, we share South Africa together as an amazing country, and you were very involved in the anti-apartheid movement in the early 1990s, and went on to build this organization through South Africa, obviously in Durban, through surfing, and also in Mozambique, and have also worked out a way, probably through hard work and ingenuity and your inspiration, to be able to connect to some global figures, truly global figures, that have put your work on the map. And so I think many people that are listening to this are really looking for a way in which to inspire people who've got that leverage and reach to support them in their charity. So we'd love to hear about that. Obviously, that you've had an audience with Pope Francis, with Kelly Slater, with Prince Harry, and so many people that have this global reach. And we'd obviously love to know, how you connect to people who have that level of influence on our planet, but also what you're passionate about and how you feel that you utilize your resources most to make a difference for positive change. So please just start this by giving us a brief introduction, if you will, Tom, into your life and what's taken you to where you are now.
Thanks for that, Craig.
That's right.
Yeah, it's I'm 48 now, and when I was 18, I went out to South Africa on an anti-apartheid trip. It was a fact-finding trip with anti-apartheid activists. You got to remember, I was very young. So, I mean, as I said, 18 years. So I wasn't in any way, shape or form a great contributor. I was sort of tagging along for the ride, really, and had a fascination for South Africa and its political discourse at the time. So I ended up in South Africa, and some of the activism and the camaraderie that I saw at the time sort of triggered a bit of a falling in love with the country, and not to mention the fact that it's super beautiful, and people across the board can be really wonderful. So I found myself in South Africa in a way that hadn't been planned, and I think that's one of the kind of craziest things from my perspective, is that my career path wasn't planned in the slightest. I kind of fell in love with things along the way, and was kind of led a bit with my passions to where I'm now running an organization called Surfers Not Street Children. It's essentially an organization that empowers street children and children living at risk of street connectedness to be able to leave street life, and also to look at ways that they can develop their own lives and have potential in their life. So it's a strange sort of path that's been taken, but that's where I am now.
And Tom, where did this all come from? Because, you've made massive change for people. We all, so many of us around the world, obviously look to help all the time. We help our loved ones and our community around us. But what do you think triggered the change in you taking an interest to dedicating, a huge part of your life to helping these kids? Was it a moment of inspiration? Was it that you saw a child suffering? Was it that you met with a lot of people and decided this would be a good idea? What was the spark that has lit this fire that's growing?
Well, I think there's two. One is that my father has been a great inspiration to me. He's actually a musician, a singer, songwriter, but also a social justice activist and an ordained Anglican priest, which is quite a eclectic mix.
Yeah.
But he was always into social justice issues. So, as a kid growing up, names like Nelson Mandela or Steve Biko and Martin Luther King and others from the past or that present were sort of names that were talked about in our household. So I had quite an understanding of social justice issues. And in fact, the trip that I did to South Africa in 1990 as an 18-year-old was with my father. And he was working with Desmond Tutu and other activists at the time. And so it was just this fascinating trip that I got to go on and experience. So that was the first thing, having the background of a father who is involved in those things. And I had and still have a tremendous respect and love for him. But also when I was on that trip, we didn't just stay in South Africa. We went to Mozambique, and that was during the Civil War. And that was actually a terrifying trip. I mean, Mozambique's a fantastic place now on many levels, but at that time it was a frightening place to be. We could only stay within the capital city. You just couldn't get outside the city. And whilst I was there, my father had a friend there who was also an Anglican priest called Bishop Denis Sengulani. And Bishop Denis was in charge of, he was an activist as well, peace activist, and was in charge of, had these programs called Swords into Plowshares, which was how to come out of, a bloody civil war, violent civil war, into a new era in Mozambique. And one night we were having dinner at his house, and food was scarce. I mean, it was like it was in the days where it was a little bit of chicken, a bit of cassava. There wasn't huge amounts of food, so it was a very humble meal, to say the least. And afterwards, he said, "Hey, I just want to introduce you to some friends." And I was like, "Okay, great." We're a guest in his house. He took me downstairs, and we went onto the streets, literally outside his house. And there were, without any exaggeration, around 100 kids sleeping on the streets with blankets. And he came over to the kids and introduced me to them. And I was totally blown away because, I didn't even know that there was such a thing as street children. It had never come onto my radar at all. And I could not get over the fact that children were living on the streets. It just blew me away. And I also couldn't get over the fact that they trusted him. He made sure they had food, made sure they had blankets. He didn't have somewhere they could stay. So they were on the streets. He was doing the best he could, but he was like a beacon of hope in the lives of these kids. And it was an extremely powerful moment for me, and one that stays in my mind to today. But when I went back into South Africa shortly afterwards, I then started asking people that I was connected with within the ANC and other South African Council of Churches. I was asking people, "Hey, what's happening with the street kids?" Because of course now I was noticing them in South Africa as well, now that my mind had been switched on to this. And I started getting to know a group of kids on the streets in the area that I was involved in at the time, the Eastern Cape, East London in South Africa. And that moment with the bishop in Mozambique on the streets of Maputo had really changed my life.
Wow. And so when you look at everything that you've created since that moment where you met those street children, and, let me just say that I can, not in exactly the same way, but I can absolutely relate to the fact that, change, when I studied neuroscience, change happens either through intensity or trauma. And I suppose that moment was both. It's a traumatic experience and it's intense, right? So when you put those two things together with somebody that obviously has the heart that you have, it creates an explosion of change inside you that, whether it was that day or 6 months later that you started really getting into it, that, I suppose that triggered something huge in you. What's special to me about you is that you go on and you take massive action. Many of us see these things and we try to help for a while, or we give some money, or we do what we can. But so I guess my question is, what do you feel that it's been since that day that you think this has got to change? I'm dedicating so much. I'm going to give everything to this. What's your psychology that's made you do that since you saw that? What do you think's in you? Is it your dad? Is it your genetics? Is it that your values just say, I'm not standing for this?
Yeah, I think there's, again, two things. I think one, that it was a real sort of moment of my eyes being open to something that was a little difficult to walk away from, actually. It just triggered something in me that I wanted to be involved. But right back at the beginning, I didn't know that would be my sort of vocation for life. No. It was something that, I became passionate about at the time. But I suppose a character trait I have, and I guess this is just me, and many other people have this as well, is that I'm kind of like a dog with a bone. When I get into something, or I kind of just don't let it go. I mean, it's the same with my surfing. My father says, and mother say, that when I was a kid, whatever I was into it like 120%.
Yeah, got it.
I never had kind of a few things. Yeah, I like that. That's okay, and this is okay. I was into one thing, and whether it was as a kid skateboarding, or when I started surfing when I was about 13, then it was surfing, and then I still surf now, and I'm still like as I mentioned earlier, I still feel a bit like a teenager, still frothing the same way I was as a teenager. So there's something about that I have inbuilt in me that, and sometimes I suppose to the detriment, because you can sort of flog things, Yeah, exactly. And so I do find that the type of work I've done with street children, I think it will have taken that character to still be doing it now, because it's been a long, hard journey. And I would say that although the last sort of decade have been, we've seen bigger progress and much more connection with people, that's only the last 10 years. I mean, this has been going on for sort of more than 25 years. And so the first half of it was just a slog. But I didn't find it necessarily a slog, because I was so into it and wanted to bring change in the lives of these kids. And, I'd found a team that was awesome, and we were, by no means was it a one-person show, that I just slogged away at it, really.
So you've mentioned a number of values and behaviors there, Tom. What do you think are the three key elements of you that have made this successful over this period of time?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you often find, and I find this extraordinary, and other people who are really passionate about charity would find this extraordinary, is that people often, they kind of find it hard to believe that you're actually doing this type of work for the right reason. As if, well, yeah, you probably do want to help, but it's, so you want a job as well, And actually, I have an undying passion to see no child having to live on the streets. I mean, that hasn't changed for me since 1990. I thoroughly believe that that no child should have to live on the streets. Until that's a reality. And also, I've learned over the years that it's not just living on the streets, it's being connected to what we call street connectedness. So that, I think, has been a value that whenever we've, sometimes we've really reduced the number of kids on the streets. So we start looking at what's the next most connected thing where kids are suffering. So it's a passion, really, a value that I just believe that children shouldn't have to grow up like that. And I think I was fortunate to have a good upbringing, and when I say good, I just mean, no major problems, and love. That's essentially what I mean. I was loved as a kid by both my parents. And I think that's left some, after seeing what I've seen on the streets, I just have this desire to see other kids have that and not have to go through childhood without love. So that's certainly one of the I suppose, the values that I have. Another thing is that I never met one of my grandfathers actually, and but he told my father, he said to him, look, if you fuse the passion you have in life with meeting the need of the people or of people, you'll be fairly happy in life. Mm-hmm. And that still really rings true to me. That,
yes.
Before 98, I used to work with street children on the one hand, loved it, was passionate about it. And I used to surf on the other hand, loved it, was passionate about it. In 1998, I fused the two. So we brought the surfing into the programs. And by 2012, we'd completely realigned the program to be based around surfing. And I think it's the best work that I've done. And again, I stress that it's a team, and you know, they're an incredible team. But fusing these passions has produced the best output from me, because I just love it. It doesn't feel like work, you know? Yeah. And so that would be, I suppose, a principle is finding, because there's things I could do that would, that were different. And I'm not sure I would, I might, make more money out of it if it wasn't a charity or something or whatever. But fusing what I absolutely am passionate about with the, trying to empower street children has meant that although what it doesn't do is take away the challenges, and so there can be untold stress and strain involved, I feel really happy doing it.
Yeah,
and again, I'm not saying that I'm endlessly happy.
No. It's tough work. And you mentioned an incredible team. Talk to us a bit, because many people that are watching this, I'm sure, like me, many of us have started non-for-profit organizations, social enterprises, community interest companies, charities, or commercial organizations where either we've, as I've said before, we've started a team or we've inherited a team or a culture. Mm-hmm. What do you feel that is the secrets that you know now and that you've worked on that create and embody this great culture that you have in your organization? What's the magic that creates a great culture?
Yeah, I think I do have a great team, actually. I'm really fortunate. And I have social workers and carers, lifeguards, surf coaches, administrators in South Africa, Mozambique, and in the UK now as well. And I think the first thing is loyalty. And let me clarify, I don't mean loyalty to me. I mean loyalty to the cause that we're serving. So it kind of doesn't work if I bring someone in who is fantastic but doesn't really buy, it's just a job for them, or it doesn't really buy into. Yeah. I've learned that the hard way, actually, over the years. And at the moment we have a team where everyone is invested in the cause, the kids that we serve. So I think that would be, I suppose, in a sense, putting it slightly crudely, it's loyalty to the brand, or loyalty to the core mandate. And so I almost place that as the highest. That's the first thing I look at: is this person loyal to the cause? Are they here because they feel passionate about it? I think you got to be careful, because tends to be, if you've started something, that it's rare to find someone who's as passionate about that thing as you are, because you founded it, but you can find people who are really passionate, and you can see how that would become a real, something really big in their life as well. So that would certainly be the first thing. The other thing I've learned is that the thing that the difficulty for charities is you don't have the money necessarily to hire the best people. So inevitably you try and develop people to meet the need. And that's a really difficult one, because, the job that you're doing tends not to be easy. So you actually do need the best people.
Yes.
So you've got to somehow try and balance your growth across the board. So in a sense, you can grow fantastically in terms of your activities. But if you haven't got the funding to get the right people, you can really come unstuck. And I don't have the magic answer for that, but it's just being cognizant of the fact that the kids that you serve, I mean, when I first started doing this, South Africa was anarchy. I mean, really anarchy. There was, you think of the welfare system was made for the minority. In 1994, it just exploded, couldn't cope. And so there were no rules and regulations, there were no guidelines. So we had to salvage something of integrity within anarchy. But times have changed. And I think that the thing now that I really try and do is to make sure that we don't outgrow. I mean, vision is fantastic, but making sure in the vision that you've thought carefully about, making sure the balance is between your growth and your capacity, staff capacity, and an ability to bring on the people you need is there.
Mm. What would you say the percentage is? I'm not going to hold you to any particular figures, but this is a big argument that's been raging for decades, I think, within the non-for-profit sector, is that, I've spoken to many amazing fundraisers and people on the ground and people who are so loyal and dedicated to the cause that won't take any more money, than they're paid, or they, some of them are volunteers and what have you. What's your view of paying people a lot of money? Because I know there's some charitable organizations in the world that find people. I've heard of organizations, particularly in America, that have taken, for an example, traders off the stock market floor, paid them, looked to fund them very, very handsomely to then make many millions as fundraisers, just do it for a different depth of cause. So what's your view? I mean, do you look for who's loyal to the brand and the cause and look after them whichever way that you can? Or do you have a particular financial structure that you make sure that these guys are paid in a certain way?
Yeah, I mean, look, we certainly aren't paying huge salaries. We're kind of standard for small NGO, really.
Yes.
In each of the countries. Look, I can see the value. I mean, as you're telling me, as you're posing that question, I can see the value in someone coming in and being paid a lot of money to raise a lot of money. It's money that the charity wouldn't have had. So I get it. It's not how we work.
No.
I do think it's a big question. I think at the end of the day, if you're bringing in donations, you do have a responsibility to make sure that those donations are spent in the best way. And I think
yes,
you've got to have some code of ethics that, we don't have particularly high salaries. We want more of the money to go to the people on the ground. I think in most cases, if someone wanted to get into this to make big bucks, they'd probably not do this.
They wouldn't be here, right?
Exactly, yeah. And actually, case in point, anyone who thinks that it's an easy way to make money, it's a thankless task to bring in, to even sustain NGOs in many ways. I think where it changes a little bit in this day and age is the idea of social enterprise. And I'm not a leader on that at all. I'm just sort of getting my head around it as well. I do see real value actually in social enterprise, because as times change, and sort of the coronavirus era is a good example of that, giving to charities is less palatable to many people, partly because some charities have mismanaged and leaves a bad taste in the mouth of givers, partly because people's scenarios change after the 2008-2009 financial crash. I found massive change in fundraising. Honestly, between 2000 and 2008-9, it wasn't difficult to fundraise money.
Yeah,
it really wasn't. If you had a real need, if you had integrity, you had some brand, you could show people that you're doing what you say you do, and there were checks and balances. It was actually quite easy to raise money. In the decade after that, it really wasn't. Something changed in that financial moment, in that global recession. And again, when you're in a moment like this COVID-19 era, it just reminds you that you're a bottom feeder if you're a charity that's reliant on donations. So we are very much exploring the idea of social enterprise in order to have a bit more control over the income for the organization.
Right. And you talked about the crash, you've talked about coronavirus. Tom, when we go globally for a minute and you look at the massive challenges that not only, all different charities, incur from time to time, but, globally as a race with a pandemic now and the financial difficulties and climate change, and our global health system, what do you feel is the biggest challenges that we face right now, or one or two of the biggest challenges that sometimes keep you up at night? And how do you feel best that we can overcome them in the next couple of decades or with the next generation? So what do you think are the biggest challenges that we have, and how do you feel that we're going to manage or even overcome them?
I suppose the biggest sort of worry, in a sense, that I have is that I see the massive importance of the macro campaigns, like climate change, for example. But we've got to be able to fight macro and micro at the same time.
Yes.
In other words, if we just invest everything into a better tomorrow, basically it's like saying, well, if you're unfortunate enough to be in a bad way today, too bad, because we're focused on tomorrow. Somehow we need to be able to keep a dual approach. And, that means acknowledging that some people are really struggling today, and also that there are issues which are really serious for tomorrow. Otherwise, you tend to see a bit of a divide. The other thing, I suppose, is that a lot of these struggles are interwoven. And I think we've got to be really careful to be able to allow ourselves to gently and generously look at these issues and take, for example, climate change. Hugely important, hugely. But also there are people who are struggling and maybe involved in certain practices that aren't great for climate change. So because of desperation. So how do we, without suddenly writing a swathe of people off, and causing catastrophe in their lives, how do we have a more generous approach that looks for alternatives that are inclusive of even those at the bottom of the pile?
Right. It's kind of like saying the example of, well, let's not travel globally anymore because it's ruining the planet. But then all the people that depend on tourism are in deep trouble, right? So, that kind of example, absolutely, so I completely get that. And that, I suppose it's a management situation, a delicate management situation but you've still got to inject a lot of change into it, right? It's that balance.
That's right. And recognizing that we come from different parts of the world and different
cultures.
For some people, it might be seen as a luxury to have the time and the ability to campaign about tomorrow, because it means that you're not having to worry about today.
Well, if you can't eat, then absolutely.
That doesn't make the macro campaigns any less urgent. I mean, like I said, the campaign's super urgent. It's just using it as an example,
Right, absolutely. And so just talk to me a bit more, because you've been super successful at fundraising at the highest of levels with regards to, who you're connected to and how you've managed to develop that. Talk to us a bit, because there's many of us, of course, watching this that are focused on, wide fundraising, where we're running campaigns with several thousands of people for £10 each, or, in South African terms, a couple of £100 each. Whereas, and a lot of people really want to inject, different streams of revenue from very wealthy people. So just talk to us a little bit about, if you were to give us 2 or 3 pieces of advice with regards to fundraising, what would it be?
Well, I mean, interestingly enough, I look at 2 things. fundraising, but I also look at the cause and promoting the cause. So we don't have huge budgets, interestingly enough, but we have had, we've done well at having extraordinary sort of partners, and doesn't make them better than other partners, but they're kind of extraordinary in some senses. They're well-known people, and that for me is really important when we're trying to, get public thinking changed around an issue. For example, street children, often considered in some areas architects of their own situation and sort of the throwaways of society, and people tend to sometimes blame them. And having high profile people involved has really been great for advocacy. And of course, for fundraising, even if we're not a massive organization and haven't had massive budgets. But I think what's attracted the supporters that we do have to the work that we do is I've always tried to maintain, through our social media, through our web, an integrity of what we say is what we do, and looking at ways of bringing what you do to people is really difficult, because people come out to South Africa, they'll come on the streets, they'll meet the kids, and they'll be blown away. But how do you bring that experience to people sitting in the US or Europe? How is that possible? And one thing we've realized is that actually, if you fuse really good marketing with integrity. So I'm not saying for a moment, market only your best or market what's not real. I'm saying, we've tried to ask ourselves, how do we bring that experience to people who don't have the luxury of being able to go out and experience, but would like to be connected to a community, such as this. So we've always tried to make sure that in how we market ourselves, we're able to show people through words and pictures that actually we really are about this cause. And we've tried not to come across, obviously we want all the, we run things professionally. We don't want to suggest anything to the contrary, but we also haven't tried to go for a sort of corporate image. We've tried to just be who we are.
Yes, be authentic.
Be authentic, but be professional at the same time. So we found that, for example, with the surfing community, we found that we've sort of become a bit of a surfer's choice, because when people read the posts, they can see that this is really, surfing is really core in what we do. So they can see the integrity of that shining through. So I suppose it's a difficult one to coin, but we've really tried to work, carefully at articulating what we do and why.
I'll tell you something else that I've been thinking about just in the last couple of minutes that you've been sharing this, Tom, is that you stay disciplined. And I think this is something that I've suffered with in my life, is that I've, in the past, definitely, and I'm better now, but, with my fundraising experiences over the last 10 years, I've tried so many different things and in many different ways. And I think, obviously, to stay with surfing and to be disciplined about helping street children, this is where we do it. This is how we do it. We're bloody good at what we do, and we stick to what we're good at. And there's consistency. So, it's this thing about, 100,000 hours makes you a master. And you guys have clearly become very good at what you do because it's what you do, and you've done it for a long time. Do you feel that because, everybody that I've talked to that's been super successful in different ways in life, they focus and they're authentic. You've mentioned some really important key values, which is about integrity and loyalty and authenticity. But it's presumably also about the fact that what's made you successful in the brand globally of surfing and other people who are looking to champion your cause of eradicating the fact that children need to sleep on the streets is the fact that you stay really disciplined and focused. Is that fair? Is that a big piece?
Yeah, I call it hugging your mandate. There was a huge temptation. If you go back to the 1990s, when I first started, street children was an issue, actually. It was synonymous with Brazil in the late 80s and early 90s. Obviously, I got into it in the early 90s, so I did quite a bit of looking back at the 80s. And the place I looked back to always was Brazil. There was a big thing, Street Kids Brazil. They'd made some great headway, and some really amazing thinkers like Paulo Freire and others had been sort of the bedrock of thinking around empowering street children. It was great. It was radical. I loved it. It was fantastic. But in the 90s, some really big issues started happening. So we had AIDS in South Africa, and globally, of course, but South Africa was a real epicenter, and Southern Africa, of the AIDS crisis. So whereas in the early 90s, I could write an application for support or funding around street children, people were turning around to me and saying, well, you know what, if you could just write this about AIDS, then that would be much better. And I would say, well, actually, yeah, AIDS, cross-sects with everything we do, but I feel a little bit uncomfortable and suddenly changing my mandate to be specifically an HIV AIDS organization and sort of tag Street Kid in there somehow. And so we had to find a way of, I kind of just stayed to the mandate. And of course, we were heavily involved in the AIDS crisis because it was so massive, but I felt uncomfortable about suddenly changing from being a Street Kids organization to being an AIDS organization, because that was what the development trend at the time was based on the crisis. But it left a bit of a bad taste in my mouth that I was having to sort of rewrite what we do to fit what was being asked for. And then afterwards, when AIDS drugs were keeping people alive and AIDS was no longer the specter that it was, it then started changing. And then a few years later, people were saying, well, Tom, if you could just write this, can you just tell us make this more about human trafficking? Because, Street Kids is, it's not really on radars right now. And, if you would just write about human trafficking and sort of tag Street Kids in. And again, I felt that same, I don't know if I feel comfortable about that, because although, it's a very valid and important issue, and there's some divergence and cross-section at times, do I really want to change our entire mandate because there's a trend in development at the moment? And that's not to negate on the importance of the issue of human trafficking. No. So what I realized over time was that it would be harder to stay issue specific, but for the soul of the organization, it was probably the right move. And that's over the years, that has actually, and I've noticed in the last particularly 3 to 5 years, I've realized that was the right move, that we've always hugged our mandate, stayed issue specific. We've not gone into, like, for example, now it would be a very easy thing for us to sort of play down street children and become more about mental health, because that's a big, an important moment for mental health at the moment. Now, we are involved in mental health in many ways, but our mandate still, and that's not to negate about the importance. I'm personally think it's amazing that mental health awareness is so high. Brilliant.
There's so many good causes, absolutely.
Right. But do I feel comfortable suddenly saying, well, okay, let's play down the Street Kids and we're all about mental health now? No, because I kind of feel that's not the right way. So
I understand.
Just staying issue specific. Yes, we all of these things intersect what we do, but we are about street children and children connected to the streets,
Yes, no, that's really powerful. And it's so, and that I'm just thinking about your values deep from your father and yourself and your experiences, because there's something that is in our psychology, I think, and our genetics and our environment. There's so many pieces that when you find people like yourself that stick to something when there's so much temptation because you want to help to go off in all different directions, it's really important, I feel, these days more than ever, that people stick to what they know is their purpose. You know, because otherwise you just get lost in a sea of things. I suppose 80 years ago or 60 years ago, it's like, you know, when we look at our kids, you know, our grandparents had 5 different careers they could choose, right? Now there's 5,000, 50,000 different things you could do as a job. And so you just got to stay focused on your purpose. That's really powerful.
Well, there's an irony, sorry, just to cut in there, that, you know, I mentioned human trafficking, and we staying true to our mandate of street children. Ironically, in the long run, it worked out really great for us because we actually attracted the attention of a human trafficking organization in the US, because there is crossover, and they said within our mandate we can support you because of the crossover. So ironically, we have a great partnership with an organization called Not for Sale campaign in the US, but the funny thing about it is it's because we stayed on our mandate, in a sense. Yeah,
and let them partner with you, absolutely, because they do what they do. 100%. So, Tom, you know, if there was one or two pieces, I know there's lots, but if there was one or two pieces of advice that you can give to us, you've given us so much today. If there was one or two key pieces of advice that for somebody who's running an organization right now, and 6 months ago or 9 months ago or 18 months ago, they were flying. And the coronavirus has now hit a huge amount of well, all of us, but sometimes financially, a lot of people are struggling right now, particularly in the non-for-profit sector. You've been through a number of different challenges over the last 25 years where things haven't been going your way, I'm sure, or 2008 comes along and the anti-apartheid and this, you know, there's been loads of challenges that you've had. Give us a piece of advice when we're in the middle of the coronavirus and these guys are struggling. What's your advice to them?
Yeah, I think probably it's looking at the vehicle and working out what is the core component that you need to keep going through this time. And it might be the most important of the services to those you serve, and be okay with identifying because that's the piece that will probably keep you alive through this time, and focus on that piece. So for example, right now we're in lockdown in South Africa, so we can't go surfing.
No,
we have and we've lost money out of our budgets. I mean, overnight we lost money from those supporters of ours that give out of profits from sales. So we lost considerable money. And so what I had to do with my team was look at what is the most important thing to be doing right now. The most important thing is to be making sure that the children have the care and support they need through the Corona period time. It's absolutely vital, because if they're on the streets, they get rounded, they get put in these makeshift centers, and we don't want any kids. We've got our mandate is to serve these kids who are in our program. So that was it. Yeah. And so we realized that that's what we need to keep going. And also, if we do keep that going, then when the Corona period's over, we've sort of continued with our mandate throughout that period. Shave off what you don't need to, what you don't need to have going, in a sense, because you got to think of the longevity of the program. So somewhere, it's a bit like I very crudely saying, you could have a car or something, and you take the engine out, the thing stops. Make sure the engine's going. I mean, you could take the windscreen wiper off, and you could take
sure.
You could take the roof off. You could take the lights off. Even the thing's still going to move forward. But the core, try and identify what that absolute core is, because that's what you've got to keep going.
Yeah, powerful. That's powerful. And so, my final question really, as you talk, is, because I'm conscious that I said like 40 minutes, and I always go
no
way
problem.
over the.
No problem.
My final question with this is, lots of people talk about vision, and especially when we've got a deep cause that we value so much. And yours is in children and ensuring that they never have to grow up, on the streets. What is now that you've worked and you've grown up with this, and you're now a leader of this, what's your vision? I know you've got a real childlike energy with your surfing and your kids, and so what's your vision for the future? What do you still dream of, in the world?
Yeah, I think always a problem often a problem when somebody has founded an organization is making sure that organization would still be strong. God forbid you got hit by a bus the next day.
Yes.
So my vision would certainly be that the organizations, the Mozambique program, the South Africa program, and the UK program can operate well without me. That would be
right.
the first thing. Secondly, I think that I want to try and ensure that the culture of the organization is always looking at, rather than being static, is always saying, let's reflect and act in a sort of cyclical way, so that we're always asking ourselves the question, are there kids that we're not seeing, we're not accessing? Because, to give an example of that, we work with kids on the streets, but you could get all the kids off the streets, but there are kids that are living one step removed from the streets in Durban that are suffering exactly the same ways. Are we working? So this constant idea of reflection and action is a culture that I'd like to see that's taken grip within the organizations, so that we're not afraid to always challenge ourselves and say, okay, well, we've been doing this for the last 5 years, maybe quite successfully and with challenges, but are we really, let's reflect on whether we're really fulfilling our mandate. So a culture of constant reflection and action would be thrilling, actually.
That's so powerful. Thank you so much, mate. Thank you for all of your time and inspiration. And unfortunately, I was so privileged to be looking forward to going to South Africa before the coronavirus hit. And next time that I go, I'm going to come and see what's going on there.
Fantastic.
I'd really love that.
That'd be wonderful.
Thank you so much for everything, and great to speak to you today. And congratulations in all that you continue to do. Thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for your encouragement. I really do appreciate that. And thanks for your time too. Yeah, it was good fun.
Cheers, Tom. Thank you.
Cheers then. See ya.
Bye-bye.